If the president is mad about what these reports say, one thing that he should keep in mind is that he doesn't need to hit as high a number as Joe Biden was hitting.
He likes big number, though. Big number good for Donald Trump. So that's, that's tough for him to get into his head.
If he let in millions of immigrants, he could get a really big job growth number. The life is trade-offs, right?
Yeah, I know. Big boy doesn't like trade-offs. Big boy like big numbers, though. So I think that's all it is. He writes the Very Serious newsletter on Substack and co-hosts the legal podcast Serious Trouble with Pope Hat, otherwise known as Ken White. It's Josh Barro. What's going on, man?
Hey, Tim. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good, all things considered.
Me too.
Life is okay. I'm back here in New Orleans. We've got the Red Dress Run this weekend.
What is that?
Have you ever put on you go down and drink in a red dress? Are you a dress drinker? Is that something that sounds appealing to you, or is it you too butch?
That is not something that I've ever done before.
Okay.
I guess like New Orleans in August, you want something pretty lightweight if you're running around drinking.
You want something flowy,
something flouncy,
something to think about. Yeah. All right. Well, maybe next summer we'll invite you down. August. I don't. August 9th is maybe not the best time to visit New Orleans. So it's mostly a local thing. But
I don't think so.
We'll be doing well. I want to grab you to discuss all things economy. You had a Substack post a day or two ago that said, "Well, this jobs report clarifies some things."
Yeah.
And it did. So I'm curious just on your kind of macro view on what's happening with the economy. And, also, I guess, on the meta, like the conversation that was happening in econ world for like the weeks leading up to this, where people are like, wow, something's off about this. And I think now we have a pretty clear picture of how things look.
Yeah, I mean, it had been this sort of surprising thing because, remember back in early April, the president announced the, quote unquote, Liberation Day. He announced these massive tariffs on virtually every country in the world. And there was hugely negative market reaction to that. And it really looked like the concern was this is going to push us into a recession. Not only are these tariffs very high and disruptive, they're also uncertain. People can't do their business investment planning when they don't know what tax policy is going to face them based on whether they put a factory here or there. And it sort of causes you to want to build a factory nowhere. And there was really a lot of deep concern about that. And then the White House partially dialed back that stuff. They especially dialed back the China tariffs a lot. And the markets basically just, completely recovered, started hitting new records again. And the economic data continued to look largely pretty good. I mean, maybe indicating a little bit of slowdown, but, fairly strong jobs reports. Inflation is ticking up a little bit, but not a ton. And it sort of looked like the tariffs basically didn't matter very much. And then similarly, you've had this huge immigration crackdown that has led to a cratering in the flow of immigrants into the United States. You also have these disruptions at workplaces that are making it difficult for people who are not authorized to work in the U.S. but have been doing so regardless to go and work. And so you should expect some economic disruption from that, regardless of whether or not you think it's good policy. And that hadn't really been showing up very much in the data, and it was a little bit confusing. And so then we got this jobs report last Friday that not only showed a fairly weak 73,000 new jobs created in July, but there were huge downward revisions of job creation in May and June, basically to close to zero in each month. And so it was a huge change in what the data says. It basically says, in the second quarter of the year, we had almost no job growth. And that makes a little bit more sense with tariffs weighing on businesses and making it difficult for them to expand and hire, and with the immigration policies making it difficult for businesses to maintain their existing workforces. So now the data is a little bit more in line with what we would expect it to be. I'd note, this doesn't show the economy going into a recession. The bottom is not falling out of the labor market, but it does show that things are really slowing down. And then similarly, we're seeing some upward pressure in the inflation data, which again is what you might expect when you impose a bunch of these new taxes on, all sorts of kinds of goods, which is what tariffs are. So, there'd been this talk of, were the economists all wrong? Was the tariff policy actually a good thing, or at least an unimportant thing? Jason Furman, who was a top economic advisor in the Obama administration, had a piece in the Wall Street Journal shortly before this jobs report came out saying, well, actually, the job growth has weakened somewhat and price levels have gone up somewhat. We've missed growth forecasts a little bit. So again, it's not a recession, but it shows, we're doing worse than we might otherwise have been. And then this data just added on to that to show again that, things are weakening even if they're not falling apart.
Yeah, tough break for Bill Maher. Comes back from vacation. The first episode does a big thing about how we were wrong about the tariffs. Now the tariffs seem to be everything seems to be going good. It's a cautionary tale for those of us that are not really econ people that are kind of freelancing from time to time.
Sure.
And so taking that cautionary tale into perspective, though, you have more expertise than I do, and went to Harvard. What's your crystal ball on this? I mean, like where are the trends taking us, and across any of those elements?
I mean, it's looking like what the economists said the tariffs would be, which is they're a drag on the economy. But actually, back in April, some of the voices that were being a little more sanguine about this and, were reluctant to say the word recession were some of the economists analyzing this, basically saying, the tariffs are bad and are going to cause a drag on the economy. But most of the economy is services rather than goods. And so you can really screw up, fashion and the certain other industries that are extremely exposed to international trade, but they're small slices of the economy, and it doesn't really matter that much for if you're Microsoft or Meta or something like that. It doesn't matter if you're one of these AI focused tech companies. It doesn't matter
doing
if
big
you're
data centers, doing financial services,
right. And so Jason Furman's line actually with this is tariff derangement syndrome, which is that, economists hate tariffs and they have good reasons for hating tariffs, but they sometimes forget that they don't drive the whole economy, and you can have a really dumb policy that hits only a slice of the economy, and that's not important enough to push you into a recession, even though it's hurting you. The irony of this, though, is that, if you're an investor in the US and you don't know where you can put a factory because you don't know what the tariff policy is going to be like in a year, what it pushes you toward is investments in non-trade affected industries. So basically, the whole idea with Trump is that we want tariffs to reindustrialize the United States and to get people to build factories. And in fact, what it ends up doing is saying, well, God, I can't get into manufacturing. I better put my money into financial services or into healthcare or one of these service sectors that they're in theory trying to steer us away from. So the policy is not doing what it's supposed to do, but it's also not leaving investors without options in other areas.
Yeah, it's interesting you point that because we're already seeing some of that, right? Like manufacturing numbers are down. One of the other affected areas, obviously, is like cost of building and goods, right? Whether it be with steel, et cetera. I'm curious, just if you have any more kind of on the manufacturing and kind of housing costs side of things, but it also to me ties to the immigration impact.
Yeah,
what you mentioned. I think it was in your Substack you wrote that on the one hand, having fewer immigrants means like fewer jobs are going to be needed to keep like the unemployment rate low, right? Because immigrants aren't taking any jobs. And on the other hand, there are like other unintended consequences, right? Like a potentially weaker growth for the economy, inflation, maybe not broad, but again, costs, right? Like if the cost of goods for building whatever it is, like a house or factory or a business, are higher, or a machine in your business, because our goods are higher because steel's being tariffed. And if you had immigrant labor and you're unable to hire them or have to pay, you're right. Like if the costs are going up across the board, like that also I think could have some impact. No.
Yeah, sure. Because of the absolute cratering of in-migration to the United States under Donald Trump, the number of jobs that need to be created each month in order to keep the unemployment rate stable has fallen by about half. You only have to create about 80,000 jobs a month to keep pace with the growing population and avoid a rise in unemployment. So I think, first of all, it's important to keep in mind in terms of how are voters likely to feel about the job market. A lot of the jobs that were being created in the Biden administration were going to the very quickly increasing number of non-citizens living in the United States who don't vote. And so, you needed a pretty robust job growth number in order to keep people happy with the labor market. And I know, unemployment was low then, it remains low now.
Right.
So it's not like we were having a bad job market, but to some extent, the hitting 200,000 jobs created every month, it wasn't as impressive as it might sound, because a lot of those jobs were going to the very prodigious number of immigrants entering the country. The flip side here is you don't need to create that many jobs to keep the job market healthy for people who are looking for work. So I think that's, if the president is mad about what these reports say, one thing that he should keep in mind is that he doesn't need to hit as high a number as Joe Biden was hitting. But to your point there are also
big number though. Big number, good for Donald Trump. So that's tough to get into his head.
If he let in millions of immigrants, he could get a really big job growth number. the life is trade-offs, right?
Yeah, I know. Big boy doesn't like trade-offs. Big boy like big numbers, though. So I think that's all it is.
But the flip side, as you note there, is that these immigrants who've been working in the United States, some with authorization and some without authorization, they play a real role in the economy, and it's noticeable when they go away.
Yeah.
And it's much more noticeable in some industries than others. If you run a bank, ICE raids don't really matter directly for your business. But if you are in construction or agriculture or certain industries, you're very exposed to this. And you get a combination of higher cost and lower capacity in these industries. And we've got several things particularly hitting construction at once. You have these labor effects. You also have materials costs that are being driven up by those tariff policies. And we have these persistently elevated interest rates, at least elevated compared to where they've generally been over the last 15 years. And it's, the president would really like lower interest rates, but the problem is that the Fed can't really give him lower long-term interest rates. They can cut short-term interest rates, but long-term interest rates are, driven by the financial markets, and there are all sorts of factors that drive them, including the federal budget deficit. The government is going out and borrowing tremendous amounts of money. Republicans have passed this budget bill that causes it to need to borrow way more money, and that drives up interest rates because the government is competing with companies and individuals who are also trying to borrow money. And the more people who are trying to obtain something in the market, the more expensive it gets. In this case, the thing that's getting more expensive is capital. And so that's another thing that makes it difficult to go out and build homes, build factories. So those are all a drag on investment in the economy. But, again, I would say a drag that means we're getting less growth than we otherwise would have, not yet at a point where it's actually causing growth to be negative.
Yeah, I do wonder, impact on how people are experiencing the economy, though, because I just listened to you talk about that, right? It's like, you get into kind of a nerdy econ debate about what is inflation, is if prices are just going up because of tariffs, that's not really the same as inflation that's driven by monetary supply, et cetera. But a regular person that's just living their life doesn't really care about that debate that much. And looking at the industries you're talking about, agriculture, housing, right? It's all the stuff that people are stressed about, already is the stuff that has upward pressure on it with the combination of the tariff and immigration issues. I mean,
as a political matter, I would say that the key countervailing factor there is that gasoline prices are down. Okay, and that's in significant part due to policy choices that the administration has made, and they successfully leaned on the Saudis to open up the taps. Yeah. The funny thing about that is that they really think they're going to drive a boom in domestic oil production, and the low price of oil is making it, along with those high interest rates, is making it difficult to invest in new oil and gas production in the U.S. So they're not producing what they thought they would there, but gasoline prices have moderated, and so I think for some
people, except in California. I was looking at I was in Los Angeles, what the hell's going on? The gas prices are still $5 in LA. $6.
California has there's some special formulation requirements for the gasoline in California, which means then it ends up having to come out of only certain refineries. Yeah. So there's there's almost like a separate gasoline market for California and for the rest of the country. But here where I am in New York,
I landed in California, not you personally, so you Californians. I was like, what is happening?
Yeah. There's one particular gas station at the corner of La Cienega and Holloway in West Hollywood that's always $1.50 more than all the other gas stations. So I don't know where you're hanging out.
That's what the Today Show uses for their image.
Yeah, exactly.
Gas prices go up.
But so, I think as a political matter, I think there are definitely goods that are getting more expensive because of the tariffs. I think to a significant extent, the fact that gasoline prices have moderated is reducing the level of rage that there otherwise might be about that. The debate about, how you should think about tariffs as a component of inflation isn't that price increases don't count if they're driven by tariffs. They do. Right. The questions are, one, is that going to drive persistently higher inflation? Or is it a one-time increase in the price level? Because if it's just a one-time increase in the price level, then the Fed doesn't necessarily need to keep rates high because they're concerned about, what prices are going to do in the future.
Yeah.
And so if it's, prices just went up one time, this is the argument that members of the Federal Reserve Board are having. They're saying, well, this is a one-time temporary effect and it shouldn't stop us from cutting rates to support the weakening labor market. The other thing is that, again, most of the economy is services rather than goods, and tariffs, they do raise the prices of specific goods, but they're also a tax increase. And generally, tax increases are disinflationary. They take money out of people's pockets and cause them to be unable to spend as much money as they otherwise would, and that actually creates negative pressure on prices. And so in theory, tariffs should cause the price of the specifically tariffed goods to go up, but the price of everything else to go down by a little bit. Now, again, it goes down by a little bit because people are poorer and they can't afford to buy as much stuff. So it's not, a great talking point for the administration, but that is what monetary policy officials are thinking about. It's basically the president is taking a little bit of gas out of the economy by imposing these tariffs, and that actually should make a lot of stuff in the economy very slightly cheaper. And so that's another reason to, because the Fed is probably going to cut rates in September. The president wants rate cuts. It's not crazy, the idea that you would cut rates by a certain amount, especially given the weakness that we're seeing in the labor market in this jobs report.
It's like, congrats, one of the Mr. arguments, Trump, the economy's so bad, you're going to get the rate cut you wanted.
Well, exactly. I mean, there's two Trump appointees on the Federal Reserve Board, Michelle Bowman and Christopher Waller, who wanted a rate cut in July. And they both issued statements explaining why they wanted a rate cut. And they're both very concerned that the bottom is about to fall out of the labor market. And so they're saying we need to cut rates because the economy might be about to do a lot worse than it's doing right now, which is not the way the administration want to characterize it. But that is sort of the good argument there about why you would cut rates. You say, well, the stuff that's driving the recent somewhat elevated inflation is temporary, and there's these concerning signs we're getting from the labor market. We don't want interest rates that are inappropriately high causing businesses to cut jobs more than they otherwise would. That's the actually good argument for the policy the president is out there arguing for. His weird argument is the economy's great, so great, so great. For some reason, we need rate cuts.
Hey, everybody, sometimes you're hanging out on a school night with the other parents and, you want to get into something that'll make the evening a little more chill and enjoyable without having to worry about, what a half a bottle of wine will do to you the next day. And let me tell you, a good option for that is our sponsor, Soul. Soul is a wellness brand that believes feeling good should be fun and easy. They specialize in delicious hemp-derived THC and CBD products designed to boost your mood and help you unwind. Their best-selling out-of-office gummies were designed to prove a mild, relaxing buzz, boost your mood, and enhance creativity and relaxation. The gummies come in 4 different strengths, so you can find the perfect dose for your vibe, from gentle microdose, perfect buzz, noticeable high, or a fully lit experience. I'm not really into fully lit experiences these days, but the rest of them, solid. With wellness at the forefront, you can feel good about what you're putting in your body. And if you like their out-of-office gummies, you got to try their new out-of-office beverages, a refreshing alcohol-free alternative, perfect for summer sipping. Let me tell you, the neighborhood dads are into the out-of-office beverages. Kids been out throwing the football. Dads roll by, hand them an out-of-office beverage, getting really positive reviews. Bring on the good vibes and treat yourself to Soul today. Right now, Soul's offering my audience 30% off your entire order. Go to getsoul.com and use code THEBulwark. That's getsoul.com, promo code THEBulwark for 30% off. A little more Fed stuff. So we had Adriana Kugler. Yes. She resigned. She's one of the 7 board governors.
Yes.
Some discussion that this is an early resignation. It means Trump could pick somebody that then to signal who would replace Powell next year if he was to wait rather than firing Powell early, as he's teased several times.
Yeah,
I enjoyed this little bit from Political Morning Money this morning. I wanted to read to you. If the president wants to make an out of left field selection, James Fishback, CEO of investment firm Azoria, is mounting an insurgent campaign. He spoke to Trump about the nomination. The president has no shortage of highly qualified candidates, Fishback told Politico. Fishback is backed by some vocal MAGA accounts like Benny Johnson. It's like a deadpan sentence in the middle of Political Morning Money this morning. It's like, you might have to consider this insurgent candidate that you've never heard of because Benny Johnson is for it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Have you ever seen Benny Johnson on a cruise, or have you guys ever discussed any?
I've never met Benny Johnson.
Matters. You never met him?
I don't know him personally. No.
Okay.
I mean, as
might have encountered each other along the way.
So I mean, there's 7 seats on the Federal Reserve Board. And the chair needs to be one of the 7 members. Kugler's term was up a few months from now. So this is an early resignation, but it's not a super early resignation. This gives Trump a seat that he can fill, so that he can designate. The thought is basically he'll put someone in this seat, and it's the person that he will want to name as chair a few months from now when Jay Powell's term as chair is up. Because the thing is, Jay Powell will cease being chair in a few months, but he remains a member of the Federal Reserve Board until 2028 if he wants to be. And there's been some discussion, often the Fed chair resigns when the chairmanship ends, but it's Powell hasn't committed to doing that. And so if Powell didn't leave the board, then there would be no seat for the president to put someone in to possibly be chair. But now this Kugler seat is available, and he can put someone in that seat. He could pick someone really out of left field. I would note, though, that the president has complained a lot about the Fed. He's complained a lot about Jay Powell. He's talked about the idea that, maybe he has the power to fire Jay Powell if he wants to, but he hasn't. And he's really shied away from doing that at a time when he's been happy to fire members of other multi-member boards and commissions in the federal government. This has been a whole legal controversy before the Supreme Court, National Labor Relations Board, the Consumer Product Safety Commission. The president's been firing Democratic appointees from a lot of these boards. He's chosen not to do that at the Fed. And I think the reason he's chosen not to do it is I think that someone, probably Scott Bessent, has convinced him that it won't actually produce the results that he wants. Because again, the Fed doesn't control long-term interest rates. It only controls short-term interest rates. And furthermore, rates are controlled by the Federal Open Market Committee, which is the 7 members of the Federal Reserve Board and 5 presidents of regional Federal Reserve banks. So even if you impose some lackey of yours as the Fed chair, that person can't set rates by himself or herself. They have to get consensus from this very establishment-oriented set of people who are not going to be inclined to go along with that. And I think in some sense, the best thing for the president politically is to complain a lot about the Fed and say it's Jay Powell's fault that interest rates are high, and not fire him, because if you fired him, then you would show that long rates didn't actually fall after you fired him, and it would be your fault instead of Jay Powell's fault. So that leads me to suspect that the president will not do something as out of the box as people are expecting here.
Well, there's an obvious hybrid solution, which is Kevin Hassett, who's become a total hack, but has been around long enough that maybe, it doesn't seem like as outlandish of a pick, though
Kevin Hassett's going to need to run the Bureau of Labor Statistics probably. So I don't know if how many hacks
Marco Rubio is going to do that.
But Christopher Waller, who's a member of the Federal Reserve Board, that would be sort of the most, in the box pick the president could make. There's been some talk that he might do that. I think it's, the likelier that he'll pick someone like Hassett, or maybe Kevin Warsh, who's an ex-Fed official, who has, become, closer in with the president's team over the years. But the thing is, for Trump's interests, if he hopes to, shade monetary policy in a slightly looser direction, there's value for him in having someone who might actually have credibility with the other voting members of the Federal Open Market Committee. And so you have Christopher Waller right now on the Fed board making plausible arguments about why the Fed should cut interest rates, and who has the respect of the other policymakers there. I think that would be the smarter choice for him to make. And it's in a weird way parallel to the choice that he had to make 8 years ago when he put Jay Powell in his chair in the first place. Because Jay Powell was originally an Obama appointee to the Federal Reserve Board, even though Powell is a Republican. And there were other, sort of more ideologically Republican choices that he had available to him. But the problem is that, typical Republican orthodox policymakers for the Fed are going to have a more tight money perspective. They are very concerned about inflation, and they don't want to hand out a lot of loose money. And so to pick someone who, was basically in the same vein of thinking as Janet Yellen and Ben Bernanke, got President Trump a looser monetary policy than he probably would have gotten otherwise. So that's sort of, that's the challenge for him there, is that, to pick a typical partisan Republican wouldn't get him the result that he wants. And to pick a total hack won't get him the credibility with the other voting members of the committee that he wants. And so that's the case. If I were him, I would pick Waller. But I'm not sure that he's that wise right now. But I think it's probably not going to be whoever Benny Johnson wants.
Okay, sorry, Benny. One of the things you and I were aligned on, just from an argumentation standpoint, I think we both believe this before the election, was just no matter what you think about some of the particular issues between Trump and Harris, or Trump and Biden going back to 2020, the tail risk of Trump was just too great. There's just this potential that he does something really fucking crazy and disastrous. It's just not worth it. Let's just do a little tail risk talk in this context. Okay. And we have the firing of the Commissioner of Labor Statistics now. Like you said, he hasn't done anything crazy with Powell yet. Maybe he's being savvy about this, but who knows? Maybe he makes up in a bad mood one day. Like, what do you think the extent of the tail risk is, just like institutionally, about the U.S., and kind of our credibility in the global financial system right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess to start with the Bureau of Labor Statistics itself, I mean, we have this long tradition of these nonpartisan data collecting agencies. They have a very difficult job to do. When we get the jobs numbers and they come out, say this is what the job growth was last month, and then they revise it because more data comes in. These are based on just really big polls. Basically, they call up individuals for the household survey to estimate calculate the unemployment rate, and then they call up businesses for the establishment survey and say, how many people do you employ? How many people did you hire? How many people did you fire this month?
Every once in a while, you're going to get an Ann Seltzer.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and it's the same problems that you have with political polling, which is that response rates are declining. It's getting more difficult to collect the data that you used to collect in the past, and more of it gets collected in arrears. And so there have been larger revisions in recent years, in significant part because of the increasing inherent difficulty of collecting data like this. And then the administration has also been seeking to do big budget cuts at these data agencies, making their jobs even harder. And this stuff is a real public good. It's important for the financial markets to know what the economy is doing. It helps, investors make decisions about, what to invest in and where to put their money. And it gives us a fundamentally more efficient economy. So this is, it's an important thing for the government to do that produces a lot more value than what it costs to do. And so it's not good for them to interfere with that. Now, in terms of how this is actually going to affect what the Bureau of Labor Statistics is doing, I think that remains to be seen. I mean, first of all, we have to see who he puts in as a replacement. I think it's challenging to come up with a strategy to cook the books at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I mean, if you're China, you could just make up whatever number you want and put it in a press release.
Sure.
The press corps in Washington will learn very quickly if that's what's happening. You're going to have a lot of disgruntled people who are going to talk to the press about what's being done differently at these data agencies. There's also a sort of more technical thing, which is that I can come up with ways to change how you do these reports that would change the level of employment that they find. Yeah. But what the president's really after is not the level, it's the change from month to month. So it's not only that you'd need to find a way to adjust the survey to say that more people have jobs. You'd have to every month step that up and say, oh, we created more jobs this month. The survey has to get rosier and rosier month by month. You have to keep changing the methodology. So I think it's, I think it's
a question of finding a Rasmussen to do the polling for.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So I think it's hard to cook the books in the way they want, and then it would be hard to convince people that what the books say is real, because there's a lot of money to be made being right about this data.
Yeah.
Market participants out there, if they can figure out better than the government what the economy is actually doing, they're going to go make money making smarter investments. And so you already have private data that is collected that people use along with the government data. I mean, for example, there's a payroll survey that comes from Automatic Data Processing, one of the largest payroll processing companies in the country. The data is not as good as the government data, but it comes out earlier, and it's something that the markets look at. And so if this data is becoming less reliable and starting to skew in a particular direction, one thing people will see is, well, the ADP survey is still there. And there will be efforts to develop, other, alternative data collection measures, again, there's a lot of money to be made on Wall Street being right about this stuff. So there's, that information will tend to find its way out, because the government can lie about crime statistics, for example. And there's no, private crime data collection thing where someone goes out and makes a lot of money by being right.
Arnold Foundation is working on this. I forget what it's called. But,
oh, really?
Yeah, I'll send it to you. But yeah.
But here, it's not just like political signaling how people look at this data. There's a lot of money to be made by being right about it, and so that's going to limit the president's.
So you're less concerned about the tail in this area of Argentina hyperinflation. People start to stop believing the information the government's putting out, and we get into a death spiral.
Well, I mean, the thing about Argentina-style hyperinflation is that countries get into that mess because they have, big government, welfare and subsidy programs that they cannot finance by going out and borrowing in the markets. So they print money, and people hate inflation, but they don't maybe hate it as much as they would hate the really draconian spending cuts they would have to do otherwise. That's how you get into that cycle. Here in the US, the government can borrow that money. And so if you do policies that create a lot of inflation, I mean, you just make people really angry. I mean, we saw that in the Biden administration. And so that I think is part of why we haven't seen the president do the most damaging, stupid things he could possibly do at the Fed, because a lot of those things that he could do would cause a lot of inflation, would make him very unpopular. It's, the reason you have central bank independence is trying to, protect us against making decisions for short-term gain that cause long-term problems.
Yeah.
But a lot of the things the president could do with the Fed would just cause a lot of short-term problems. And so that, I think, is the main, bulwark, if I may,
so to speak,
that's protecting us against the worst things that the president might do at the Fed. So I don't, I don't think he's likely to push us in a hyperinflationary direction. But the thing is that if the government data gets less accurate, there will be these efforts to, privately replicate the data and correct it, but they won't be as good as, a BLS that does a really good job in the first place. And that's, sort of like the tariffs. It's going to be a mild, long run drag on growth. But again, it's the sort of thing that's probably small enough that you're not going to be able to pinpoint it and say, this pushed the economy into a recession.
All right, one of the longtime pod sponsors, your favorite, ZBiotics. Let's face it, after a night with drinks, none of us bounce back quite like we used to, except for the college kids listening to this pod. And let me tell you, it's coming for you someday too, youngin'. And there's a surefire way to have a great next day after a great night out on the town. It's with pre-alcohol. ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's a buildup of this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for rough days after drinking. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll be your best tomorrow. Every time I have pre-alcohol before drinks, I notice a difference the next day. And, we keep ending up being a drinking season. I'm like doing my best to not drink on podcast nights because I want to be fresh for you. I want to be sharp, but life gets in the way. I had to go to the Scissor Sisters concerts. You get invited to a Scissor Sisters concert on a school night. You got to do that. Beto is having an event here in New Orleans tomorrow on Thursday. I kind of believe that I might have a drink with Beto or some of the other people that showed up to that event. And so the only way to, ensure that I'm able to go out and have a couple cocktails and still perform the next day like you guys expect is with ZBiotics pre-alcohol. Go to ZBiotics.com/thebulwark to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use The Bulwark at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to ZBiotics.com/thebulwark and use the code THEBULWARK at checkout for 15% off. Do you have a theory of the case on why the market's so good? I'm not complaining. My things are looking good in my Schwab account, but it doesn't really make sense to me.
I'm a little baffled by it. I mean, one thing is that there's really, really a lot of enthusiasm about AI.
Yeah.
And I'm not an expert
bubble
on
like enthusiasm, maybe.
Maybe, but maybe not. I don't, I try not to assume that I'm smarter than the market, because if I was smarter than the market, I would be on my yacht instead of your podcast.
Okay. Well, you might be on my podcast on your yacht because you do like to hear yourself talk.
Yes, that's true.
And same, by the way. That was not an attack.
But so, I mean, that's part of it, that there's this idea that, whatever else is going wrong, the AI advancements are so improving the, the future profit prospects of corporations that outweighs it. I think there's also something psychological where the president announces something damaging and the market swoons, and then he withdraws the damaging announcement and the market bounces back up. People lose a lot of money by betting against the market when Trump says he's going to do something to destroy the economy and then changes his mind.
Yeah.
And so I think that has taken some of the willingness of market participants to go out there and, bet that this stuff is going to really be bad. I think it's made them a little more reticent around that. So that's another component. And then I think the third possibility is that, some of the deregulatory stuff that this administration is doing, including around energy production, probably does have a positive sign on GDP. And so that, is to some extent countervailing the negative sign that comes from the tariffs and other policy mistakes that they're making. So I think it's that combination. Then again, just reminding myself that even though the tariffs are a damaging, stupid policy, most of the economy is services, and so you can do things that are a real problem for a certain set of sectors without causing the economy overall to go into a recession, without causing the stock market to decline.
Do you have a Barro recession percentage? Do you have a Barro? Is there a
over what period? In the next year?
Yeah, sure.
I don't know, 25, 30%.
25, 30%. Okay. So are you below Goldman? I forget where Goldman was, or have they moved down, or have they readjusted?
I forget where they are. I don't know.
For a minute there, they're like 45 or 50.
Yeah,
but it might have come. I think that might have been around.
That was in April, though, right? Like when and so I think partly
come back down.
the tariffs that he's put on the EU, and then there's weird stuff like Switzerland. We've put a really high tariff on, which matters for certain specific goods, like ski lift equipment, for example. But the deals that he struck with the EU and with so far with Canada and Mexico are at a level where they're not going to completely obliterate trade with those places. And the China tariffs he proposed that really were going to be effectively an embargo, if there was 145% tariffs on China, that really important part of his trade policy does appear to have durably backed off from. And so that means that a recession is significantly less likely than it looked in April, when it looked like the tariffs were going to be a lot bigger.
Speaking of percentages,
yes.
We have one other piece of countervailing good news, which is the decrease in prescription drug costs. I would like to listen to the president talk about that a little bit.
And I think we're going to be very successful fairly soon. We'll have drug prices coming down by 500, 600, 800, even 1,200%.
You're a math man. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, as I understand it, that means they're going to pay you to take the drugs. If the price used to be $100, now it's negative $600, and so you take the drugs and you get cash along with them.
Okay,
that sounds pretty inflationary, frankly.
A little inflationary, but also, I mean, good for all the people that are on Ozempic.
Oh yeah,
think about that.
Yeah, they're going to be thin and rich.
Thin and rich. If in Trump's dreams. All right, final topic. How are you feeling about all the straights and the mustaches now? Are you thinking that you have to change your look?
No.
Because I was at a concert that was frequented by 20-something straights. Yeah. And it was like, they all have fucking mustaches now. So they're coming for you, like they're coming for your look. And I think maybe it's time for the gays to consider a different, maybe goatees come back, or large or big, long sideburns or something.
God. Well, so I mean, I think that the first important thing to remember is that we stole this from straight people before they stole it from us. Okay. Like this was like Burt Reynolds.
Didn't they steal it from us before we stole it, and then we stole it from them? Who was first? Burt Reynolds.
Who did Burt Reynolds get it from?
Yeah, I guess Burt was first, and then and then Freddie Mercury. Burt was before Freddie.
Like this was, the with the whole like 70s Leatherman type. Like this was supposed to be like a performance of hyper masculinity.
Okay, yeah, that's right.
And so in some sense, that's supposed to come from like, ideas of what a straight man is like, even though a straight man wouldn't wear head to toe leather probably.
Yeah, sure.
But so like the mustache originally came from the idea that this was like, that this was a hyper masculine thing.
Yeah.
And then we took it from Burt Reynolds and from the straight people, and now they're coming and they're reclaiming it.
Okay.
And so, it's like I need a land acknowledgement for my face or something like that. The straight people were here first.
A Burt Reynolds land acknowledgement.
Yes.
Thank you to Burt Reynolds.
Thank you, Burt Reynolds.
Every time you walk into the club.
Yeah. But I also feel like, like even though mustaches were originally straight, I feel like they are now permanently gay, even if straight people are doing them.
Okay.
I think partly they envy us and they see us having fun and they would like to be like us. And so, that's completely understandable to me, but I'm not giving up the mustache.
It's a great place to leave it. Macho Man, Josh Barro, thank you for educating us as always.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll be talking to you soon.